Markley back with you, sitting in for Tom Shattuck all this week. And with me in the studio is my good friend and my own state senator, Rob Sampson of Wolcott. And as I've been promising, we're going to talk about these electrical costs. And let's get into that. The last caller was saying the problem is that we have private companies providing energy. Rob, is that the problem in your opinion?
Well, it's a difficult question, Joe, but I mean, I wouldn't characterize it like that, because it's not like, Eversource is simply operating on its own and making the decisions on its own. I mean, it's being guided by the Connecticut legislature. I mean, the Democrats control the policy making that governs what Eversource does. And I would say that the number one issue that's driving up the cost of electricity, outside of, hidden taxes, which is a whole, separate conversation that certainly is a large aspect of why people are upset and calling in. But overall, the cost of electricity is being driven by the desire to provide more green energy or renewable solutions. And the fact of the matter is the Democrats have paid little attention to the cost of these things. They're simply trying to make and score points with the green movement. So that's why you see the focus on wind and solar, for example. But those types of electricity cost 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much as, a conventional natural gas, for example. But we have a lot of issues in Connecticut. Our primary source of electricity is natural gas, which we do not produce in the state. We've got to get it from other places. It's got to travel here through a pipeline, a narrow pipeline.
Because we wouldn't build a bigger pipeline, right?
Yeah, well, and part of the problem is that the other states that it would have to travel through, they're not interested. Massachusetts is not, big on, helping us get electricity by putting a pipeline through people's backyards in their state. So, that's a factor. You had Malloy during his administration, convincing people to switch from oil to natural gas for heating. But that's put more stress on our grid, because now all those folks have switched to natural gas, and that further, exacerbates the lack of supply. And of course, that's a priority too. They home heating customers get the electricity get the gas even before the electric plants. So you've got that. Plus, you've got these mandates from the legislature saying that you've got to go, by 2020, we have to have 20% renewable. By 2030, we have to have 30% renewable, and so forth. Republicans have been arguing all along to include things in the renewable portfolio that the Democrats, are not in favor of. And nuclear, first and foremost among them, but also hydro, even geothermal. Those things ought to be, categorized in the same way and treated the same way. And what we've been trying to do is trying to set a limit on what customers in the state will be forced to pay for green energy. We can debate the whole millstone thing too, and I know you have some comments on that too. I didn't support it back in 2017 either. But that saved us money at certain points. A few years ago, I think the consumers in Connecticut saved hundreds of millions of dollars by having that. I think the focus in 2017 was about, keeping Millstone going, because at the end of the day, nuclear might cost more than natural gas, but it's certainly less than wind and solar.
Right.
And I think the people...
And it's clean.
Yeah. And the Republicans in the legislature were like, we've got to maintain our nuclear plant, because if we lose it, we're going to lose a lot more in the end.
Yeah, it was a funny issue. This was 2017. And I was not on any of the committees that would have been dealing with this, Environment Committee and so forth. But there was a lot of talk, and I would almost go so far as to say a lot of pressure on that issue. And part of it was driven by the legislators down in the area of the Millstone plant. It's an unfortunate fact of life that people are very parochial, and sometimes it comes down to, if you're my friend, you'll vote for this thing for my district. Well, believe me, I try to avoid that, and I tried to avoid it in this one. And the funny process I had with it was Len Suzio was in the Senate with me at that time, and neither of us were sure where we were on it. And Len is an absolute bulldog about information and facts and numbers and absorbing everything. And I said, let's look into it together. So we had repeated meetings with people on all sides of that issue, basically with the attitude of, we're not doing it unless you convince us that it's good for the ratepayers in Connecticut. And they simply didn't convince us in the end. And I always felt a little bit like I was getting stuck up by Millstone, like Sikorsky tried to stuck us up, and other companies that come in and say, unless you give us more money, we're going to close down, we're going to leave the state, we're going to do whatever. And I just don't like that. The more I had it done to me, the more resistant I was to this kind of blackmail, pay up or else. And I felt that the Millstone situation was a little bit of that. And I'm still not sure. I voted against it. I'll say one more thing, and I think you're in the same, have the same mental attitude that I do, which is, if I'm not convinced it's a good idea, my default position would be to say no. Leave it alone unless I know it has to be changed. I was never convinced that it had to be changed. I'm still not. But before we're going to take a break and we'll come back to this energy question. But before we do, is there any prospect for further nuclear in Connecticut? Does that come up at all in the legislature?
The answer is yes, and I'd like to see more of that. But I want to just touch on what you were just saying, Joe, which is I felt pretty much the same way. But I would add to the conversation that was going on back in 2017 that I felt like it was gambling. We're gambling on the future, and I don't think that's something that we should ever do.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons why I was not in favor of supporting it back in the day. The big issue is the Democrats are ultimately unbelievably disingenuous. They're caught on this issue. They're 100% responsible, and yet they're trying to go back 7 years to a vote that, may be related on its face to where we're at with the electric rates. But the fact of the matter is the reason why that money is affecting us today is because of their mismanagement and because of PURA. And I know we've got to go to a break, but we'll talk more about it.
We will come back to that and the energy situation generally. This is Joe Markley, delighted to be with you today and throughout this week, sitting in for Tom Shattuck on WTIC News Talk 1080. WTIC Markley sitting in this week for Tom Shattuck, and happy to be with you and happy to be with my good friend State Senator Rob Sampson, who's here in the studio with me. And I know I've got some callers on the line, but I've been promising we're going to talk about this electrical stuff. So I'd like to give Rob the opportunity to do that because as somebody who's in the legislature right now, unlike myself, I think he's very on top of this. And let's start with something we were talking about during the break, Rob, which is this notion that really it's not the Democrats' fault. It's because Republicans voted for a bipartisan deal on Millstone in 2017, and that's what's really driving up the costs and et cetera, even though you and I didn't happen to vote for it. Is that what's going on, or is this just an attempt to distract people?
Yeah, it's spin, Joe. I mean, it's simple as that. The Democrats, they know they're caught. I mean, they're responsible for how our state government operates. They've controlled both chambers for decades. Currently, they have 2-to-1 majorities in both chambers, 24-12 in the Senate, and they control the governor's office. So if something's happening in our state government that's impacting the lives of the citizens, well, they're responsible. It's just that simple. And I know that the Democrats, feel caught. And they're trying their best to spin their way out of this situation that they're in. But the fact of the matter is to try and go back 8 years to cast blame on a bipartisan bill. I mean, sure, maybe it was being promoted by the Republican senator that was from the area around Millstone. But the fact of the matter is the Democrats ran with the bill. A number of them voted for it. I had a member of the staff look it up, and only 28 Republican members still serve in the legislature that voted for that bill back in the day. So it's really hard to cast blame on the current crop of lawmakers. And the thing about the Millstone deal, as we started saying before the break, is that, yes, it's added up to a significant amount of money in the public benefits charge today. But over the years, it's actually saved ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars also. And the Democrats are failing to bring that up. Really, what's gone on is that the Democrats have shifted us from having a legislature that's responsible to the constituents when it comes to how our electrical grid is maintained and what rates we pay and so forth, to a more progressive system, which is, empowering a state agency. Malloy, when he got elected back in 2010, one of his first things that he did was to dismantle the watchdog agency that was supposed to be looking out for consumers. That was the DPUC, the Department of Public Utility Control. And that was a independent agency, a nonpartisan, independent watchdog. And Malloy changed that. He changed that to create PURA, which is the state agency that now approves rates for electricity and so forth. But that agency is contained within the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. It is no longer an independent watchdog. It is now a political organization, and it is being managed and governed by the administration effectively. The administration gets all of the appointments for the various commissioners on PURA, and they decide which way to go. And so you got the Democrats in the legislature passing more and more green energy requirements. And the other thing about the Millstone thing is for the Democrats to be complaining about energy that costs 5 cents a kilowatt hour, like Millstone does, when they're simultaneously trying to get us to buy wind energy at 18 and 20 cents a kilowatt hour. I mean, it's an absurdity.
Yeah.
And it's disingenuous. And that's the thing I need people to understand before any Democrats come along and try and cast blame for Republicans, simply trying to maintain a reasonable outlook on what is considered to be renewable energy. Nuclear is the future. I mean, you look at Europe. That's what's going on there. Since we're being forced by the Democratic majority to adopt more and more renewable energy, Republicans simply reacted by saying, well, let's do nuclear and not wind and solar. So to have the Democrats come back and say, oh, well, your nuclear was too expensive. It's like, well, yeah. What did you expect us to do?
Yeah, it was too expensive at 5 cents when it's a quarter of the price of what they're pushing. And which isn't really practical. One of the funny things about something like solar is really Connecticut. I mean, if we were in New Mexico or points south, I could see more of an argument for hopes that solar would work out. But this always strikes me, the idea that solar is going to make a big difference in New England. I have a very hard time believing. Let me ask you, you said that part of the result, or perhaps the purpose of doing away with the DPUC, replacing it with PURA, putting it within the Department of Energy and the Environment, was a progressive liberal agenda. And I guess would it be right to say it's in two ways? It's progressive in trying to turn to more expensive so-called renewable sources, and also in trying to create some kind of equity in bill payments by having ratepayers fund folks that are not able to, or willing, or whatever, that aren't paying the bills themselves.
And certainly, Joe, it's both of those things. It's also a third thing, okay, which is the notion of progressivism itself, which is the move away from a representative system where people that are elected by the citizens of the state are making the determination on what our policy is. The legislature used to vote on electric rates back in the day. That was a good system. You had to be held accountable individually. Progressivism is this idea that we're going to replace elected representatives who are accountable to their voters with a elected or a non-elected bureaucracy, a so-called panel of experts. And that's what we got, our so-called panel of experts. How's that working out for the progressives in the audience? I would ask them. This is what happens. You get these people who think that they have the ability to know better and decide how we're going to live. And what can you do? If you have a problem with PURA, what's your recourse? If you have a problem with your elected state representative, you can run against them. You can challenge them in the next election. You can vote those people out. It becomes harder and harder as we shift more things away from elected people and into the bureaucracy. And that's one of the main things that I fight against in the legislature all the time, is we see it constantly. And during the pandemic, Joe, it was on full display. You had a complete move away from the rule of law, where things are written down, where they're the same for everyone. It's clear. It applies to everyone, regardless of race, color, age, etc. It's all right there. It's a written set of rules, and into a situation where you have people making decisions, where people are empowered, and that's dangerous. That is extremely dangerous, and that's what ends up with an authoritarian system, and executive orders and all that garbage. And we've got to understand it. First off, people on the street need to understand the difference between embracing our representative system, which is what made us so great, and fighting against this move towards a bureaucracy and a regulatory authoritarian system.
Yeah, a responsive system, an elected, you might not like politicians, but at least a person who's elected is going to be responsive in most cases to his or her constituents, or they're not going to be there long. And when you put it in the hands of bureaucrats, nobody's responsible anymore. And it's a terrible thing that started, I think, maybe the great villain of American history, I increasingly think, was Woodrow Wilson. That's when we really started down this road of saying government and the Constitution and the great representative system we have is actually a barrier to permitting the experts to act aggressively to move the country in the direction that it ought to be gone in, it ought to go in. It simply hasn't worked. It's made things worse and worse, and it really has gone out of control. COVID is a perfect example of a moment when the politicians basically turned the running of the country over to people who had who had degrees and that were able to come in and say, I'm the expert, listen to me. And of course, one of the problems is if you're talking about epidemiologists, they're an expert on an epidemic. They're not necessarily an expert on balancing the concerns of the epidemic against all the other concerns that we have in our society, including freedom, including the economy, including everything else. That's the job of politicians. Imperfect people, but they're all imperfect people. There's no reason why we should pick out a class just because of their degrees and let them do it.
Yeah, it's a perversion because you have people that are collectivist or Marxist, in their ideology, who are using the notion of progressivism and these experts as a mechanism to facilitate their dreams and their desires. I mean, because really the collectivists, what they believe more than anything is that they have the right to tell other people how to live.
That's right.
That's who they are. That's what they believe in. And they don't really care about your opinion or my opinion, Joe. They care about what they think. And when they have experts that they can turn to and say, well, look, these experts agree with us, and that's a better solution for mankind. They're destroying our culture effectively, piece by piece, and leaving the American public not even understanding what their individual liberties and rights are. And that's the great failure of, the freedom movement over the last, 50 years or so, is that we have failed to remind people how important it is to protect our individual liberties because they've been lost to these experts in this bureaucracy.
Yeah, we had the caller mentioned before that young people are so well inclined toward socialism. But it is because they've lost the passion for freedom that ought to be in the heart of every American. And when that freedom is really gone, then our hearts will ache for it. But we've got to bring it back. Hey, I'm going to let's take a minute and take a opposing viewpoint, I suspect, from Tim in Hamden. Tim, what do you have to say about all this?
Well, you guys have been going all over the place from COVID and everything else. I certainly would like to hear later on about the places where we could build nuclear plants in Connecticut, because I don't think that the amount of water and everything else and the whole idea that we're going to government and the taxpayers will subsidize them. But I want to talk directly about, I think the big failure of the Republican Party in this campaign is like, let's go to special session, blah, blah, blah. I don't hear, the immediate demand that we use the rainy day fund to pay off these situations, these public, what is it called? Public
benefits.
Public charge. Yeah, the public benefits charge. I don't want to sit there and pay my extra 100 and then next month another 100 and 150, for several months while everybody goes up to the state capitol and holds hands and sings Kumbaya. I want this stuff to be ended right now. I don't hear any Republican leadership with their main message, pay this off with the rainy day fund. This was a disaster on both sides. You guys can try and spin it as, it's really the Democrats' fault. Meanwhile, we're paying 5 times the rate for the Millstone
Yes, the
nuclear
Democrats
bailout.
we've not paid 5 times the rate for the Millstone. But what are you saying, Tim? You're saying that we should do away with the public benefits part of it. That if people can't pay their bills, that's it.
No, I'm saying that we made a mistake. We can't do this anymore, and we need to pay off this. This was part of the rainy day. This was part of the COVID disaster. That was a disaster on all sides. And essentially, if I'm not going to, I don't want to pay that extra dollar of extra $100, whatever it is per person, to go do this. I don't want to do that. And you guys can't sit there and say, yes, we will absolutely pay this off with our, how many billion rainy days.
But pay off what? I don't know what you're talking about paying off, Tim.
Instead of charging every person, this rainy day, this public benefits charge, we go in and say, how much is it? And we use the rainy day funds to pay for it.
And you're in favor of that?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it for a second, Tim. Let me give Rob a chance to, because he's got a position on all this.
This is a very uncomfortable position for me, Joe, that I'm not on the air very often on WTIC, and the very first time I'm going to be on, I'm going to have to agree with Tim. It is what it is. But Tim, you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is a genuine emergency. The Democrats bring us in for special session constantly. Oh, it's an emergency, and it's an emergency to do basically nothing that's an emergency. This actually does warrant a special session, in my opinion. It's not the first time that we've talked about it, by the way. The Republicans held a press conference in February of this year warning that this was all going to go down. But I agree with you that the fact of the matter is I have no objection to using a state surplus or the rainy day fund or whatever to pay this off. I mean, the fact of the matter is this is funds that should have been expended out of a typical budget discussion and negotiation, and they weren't. But that's a product of the majority party not wanting to live within their means. We've been after them about our, the guardrails, people talk about, that we want a spending cap and a bonding cap and things like that are actually worthy and, and followed. But the Democrats' reaction to that has always been the same thing, which is, OK, we'll follow your spending cap, but then we'll find a way to collect the money someplace else. And in this particular situation, they're just adding taxes onto electric bills, which has a lot of negative impacts. First off, unlike other taxes that you pay to the state, you don't get to write them off your federal income tax, for one thing. I even think, Joe, that there's actually tax on the public benefits charge.
Right,
you
tax
pay.
on the tax.
It's a tax on a tax.
Absolutely.
The whole thing is crazy. I am in agreement with Tim that we need to pay it off. It's money that the taxpayers have been swindled out of effectively because it's not been part of our budget process. A lot of it has never received a proper public hearing. It's never been properly voted on by the legislature. We need to fix those things, and we need to look when the state collects too much tax money. I've never been a big fan of having a large rainy day fund. Maybe you need a small amount, but most of that money, in my opinion, should go right back to the taxpayers. That's an indication that you took too much.
Let me just end real quick. I'll just end this. There's a lot of people who don't consider themselves Republican would join this fight. There's a lot of people on fixed incomes, other things that are not buying food, medicines, and everything else because they have to maintain, the cost of this incredible cost and stuff. If you guys could back off about 10% on this is the Republican fight and make it a ratepayers fight and everything, I think you would get a lot more people. And you got to get away from just good old talk radio. You guys got to get into the street and let people know that sort of stuff with protests and everything else.
I agree with you about that too. Tim, I'm going to have to go to a break. Appreciate the call, and we've got a couple of people on hold. Hang on, we'll go to you right after we come back. This is Joe Markley with you on WTIC News Talk 1080. And with going in all this week for Tom Shattuck. With me is my good friend and my state senator, Rob Sampson. And we got plenty of callers on the line. But before we go to them, I just want to have you give you a chance to get a little more into the new Tim and Rob plan for bringing down our energy rates. You had something else you wanted to follow up with about this conversation about using rainy day fund money for the public benefits overage on the bills.
Yeah, no, I maybe we should have Tim call back so that there's something I can disagree with him about. But on this particular issue, we're simpatico. I mean, I completely agree. It's an opportunity for doing something right for the taxpayers and the ratepayers of Connecticut for a change. But that's been part of the Republican plan. We complained about the misdirection of federal funds, the ARPA funds. People probably have heard of that. That's the American Rescue Plan. These are funds that the majority Democrats in the legislature have used for a lot of one-time purposes instead of, what they were intended for, which is to, offset costs related to the pandemic. Well, part of this is costs related to the pandemic. One thing we haven't talked about is the other portion of the public benefits charge, which is the moratorium created by the governor of the state of Connecticut in response to the pandemic initially.
Shut off moratorium.
Yeah, shut off moratorium. I mean, it's common. Most jurisdictions will have some sort of shut off moratorium for the winter months. We don't want to be, taking people's electricity away during the winter months. God forbid somebody, freezes to death or something like that. But Governor Lamont has extended our shut off moratorium for 4 straight years. Yeah. Which is an absurdity, and that's a big portion of what we're being paying for in this public benefits charge. And I also think it's the thing that people are upset about. The idea that hardworking people are being asked to pay for other people who did not pay their bills. And I think it's great that people are upset about it. The funny thing for me, Joe, is just understanding that people don't realize that that's most of what our state government does. Yeah, is it taxes people and uses the money for electoral purposes to garner support from various elements in society, whether it's people that are less fortunate that need some sort of handout, or it's corporations that are being offered some sort of benefit, or it's nonprofit agencies or whomever it is. I mean, but the fact of the matter is that taxpayers are being taken advantage of so that government officials can use that money to create support from various entities and special interests. And the moment that people, firmly grasp that, I think is the moment that we start to turn things around. So it's very revealing that people are so upset about this particular issue. And I just hope that it continues. I hope it's actually an opportunity for us, I think, Joe, to wake people up on the subject.
Again, for Republicans, conservatives, whatever you want to call it, people who want to run for office and say, I'm not going to go down this road to make a difference, to draw a distinction with their potential opponents. We got many patient callers, and let me go to the most patient of them, Fred in Middletown. Fred, you're on the air.
Hey, real quick, I think I heard someone say Mercury is in retrograde, which might be why Tim from Hamden has been hitting the bullseye lately.
Either that or he's hitting something else. I don't know.
I want to stick up for wind and solar. They're getting a bad rap based on an error of scale. I mean, weren't windmills always a benevolent entity in literature, for example?
Well, Don Quixote wanted to go tilt at them, I guess, but otherwise, I think of Holland, and it's kind of a cute thing. Yes.
Yeah, but they're not a problem until you try to do them at that scale. And I remember seeing it must have been 5 years ago, and the thing might have been 10 years old. I think they originally made them out of metal, and that didn't work. They didn't calculate like salt water and how much damage a seagull does. And so they rotted out. So then I think fiberglass is probably already, if memory serves, a second generation of windmill blade. But it's the scale. It's the same thing with food composting. You compost food in your own backyard. You grow worm-rich dirt that you then grow vegetables in, as opposed to like in Middletown, it's the issue that got everyone jumping up and down. You've heard about it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that, where when a truck the size of a garbage truck comes and picks out the stuff that's in the pail, in the special bag, et cetera, and how many, that's like, it's dead right there. And the solar, a piece of rope, and, drying your clothes in the sun as opposed to using electricity to run your dryer. These days, you might not want to do that because of whatever the hell they're spraying in the air, But so just that, I just wanted to stick up for wind and solar and say the error is one of scale. And just everything, yeah.
Excellent point, Fred. I appreciate the call, and I think that something I learned over the years in politics is basically big is bad. Anything that gets big enough, I think, becomes an enemy of. It starts to develop its own interests and its own power over us in society, and it becomes an enemy of the individual. And this country is about watching out for individuals, not watching out for groups, not watching out for corporations, not watching out for unions, not watching out for demographics, but for making each of us as free as we can be in our own lives to work things out for ourselves. Let's take another call since Rob isn't jumping in on that one.
I couldn't agree more.
I know you got nothing to disagree about.
Second,
Ken in Newington, what's on your mind?
I totally agree with your guest as well as the Tim's call and so forth.
Yeah,
I don't even know why we're spending this amount of time on this. And it should be a no-brainer. The rainy day fund, you just pay the damn bill and get it off our invoices to the mass public. It's crazy. And that's pretty bold to do it with inflation being what it is for all these families in the state of Connecticut, you know? And all the money that came to the state because of the pandemic, okay? And how it was used and where it's still sitting and everything. Not to even just get it, use it, and move on.
Yeah, the one question I have, and I'm going to put this to Rob, is so if we use the rainy day fund to pick up the this sudden and devastating increase in the electrical bills, what's the guarantee that the problem won't continue and the next thing we know the rainy day fund will be gone and we still have the same rate problem?
Right. Well, this goes back to the one part of Tim's comments that I do disagree with, which is the notion that this is an everybody issue. The fact of the matter is it's only the Republicans who have stood up and attempted to try and make change. The Democratic majority in the legislature, they're not interested. They were not interested back in February when we held our press conference initially. And their reaction to our most recent press conference has been, look at Millstone, look at 2017. It's like we're trying to solve the problem. We held a press conference not to cast blame. We held a press conference to suggest that this is an issue that is affecting Connecticut residents in a huge way, and it needs to be resolved. So I'm in complete agreement that we've got to find a way to pay for it, and there are a number of mechanisms to do that, and that is part of the press conference. I'm sure Senator Harding and Representative Candelora and my good friend Senator Fazio, I'm sure they all mentioned that we have access to some ARPA money still. And we will attempt to find budgetary methods to pay it off. That could be the rainy day fund. Who knows? But we also presented a number of different avenues to create a solution so this doesn't come back. And number one is to take these other charges, the moratorium costs, the costs for other policy initiatives that are generating the increase in the public benefits charge, such as a lot of givebacks that people get for making a purchase of a central air. What do we call these things? The
rebates?
They're rebates for various types of things that people purchase. Those are policy decisions. Those are things that should be incorporated in the state budget, and we want to take them out of your electric bill where they don't belong and be incorporated into the debate process to determine whether or not they're legitimate and whether they should continue or not. But if they do, they should be continued as part of the state budget and not as a hidden cost of electricity. And we have a number of other policy proposals, too. Number one, which is that if we're going to be forced by the Democrat majority to go down the road of having an increased requirement for renewable energy, we've got to set a cap on how much we're going to pay for it.
Right.
We cannot be spending 20, 30 cents a kilowatt hour for wind power when we can buy natural gas for 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's an absurdity. So we've put in an artificial impediment, which to me is too much, Phil, to be honest with you, Joe, but 150%. So that means that we would say that, okay, if natural gas is costing us $3 a kilowatt hour, we will do our 30% mandated renewable energy, but at no more than 9 cents.
Yeah.
We're not going to pay 30 cents for it. So that's a big piece of it. And also trying to get other types of energy considered as class 1 renewables, including nuclear. If we make those policy changes, we'll make a giant step towards not having the impact of the green energy movement hurt ratepayers in the way it has.
Yeah, we got to stop thinking that it's basically an act of God and there's nothing we can do about it. And again, this is one of these things we talked earlier in the show about the media and the deception they're pulling on people. Dan Haar had a column that I thought was just a hoot about, you may think your electric bill is too high, but let me go through it all point by point and convince you that it's actually completely reasonable. And the trouble is, there's a certain point, as Chico Marx says, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? There's a certain point where you just can't fool people anymore. And I think the Democrats are running up to that point. Hey, I got 4 great patient callers. Hold on. We're going to take a quick break. And as soon as we're done, we will be back to you. This is Joe Markley on WTIC News Talk 1080. Joe Markley back with you, and proud to be part of 100 years of WTIC history in a small way, sitting in for Tom Shattuck this week with my friend Rob Sampson, and with some, I shouldn't speak for of the two of them. The one I know and I know well is Matt Corey. And Matt's been a candidate before. He is a strong conservative. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
Well, I always have something on my mind.
Yes, indeed.
Now, I hear everybody.
Yes.
This is a migraine headache. If we don't solve this U.S. debt, which is exploding, we're going to wake up one day in this country, and it's going to be devastating for 90% of the people. You think $75? Forget about that. That'll be a cup of coffee. Every government program will either have to be cut by 20% or more or eliminated. And then what are you going to do?
Well, I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is one of the things that bothers me most about the current incarnation of the Republican Party is that they have stopped worrying about the deficit. They've stopped worrying about the incredible debt we've accumulated. And to my mind, the problem with it is, just as you're saying, $75 for a cup of coffee. I mean, it could be, when inflation really takes hold, it can be $75,000 for a cup of coffee.
Well, there's going to be 2 options. Either people won't buy our debt because, number one, they'll be afraid they don't get paid back, which is unlikely. But it'll be step number 2. They're not going to buy our debt because what they get paid back won't buy anything.
That's exactly right. This is how you pay off the deficit easy once the money's not worth anything. But in the meantime, your entire economy falls apart.
That's why for 25 straight years I called up this radio station. When gold was $250 an ounce, I basically begged people to buy it.
Yeah.
And now it's $2,500. Yeah. There's a reason why it's $2,500.
Yeah, because it holds its value, and I think that $2,500 is just the beginning.
It could hit $25,000 before this is over.
That's right, and the truth, again, as I said, that we know the Democrats don't care. They now have a whole economic theory, modern monetary theory that says deficits don't make the slightest bit of difference.
Yeah, okay.
And it's insane. But the trouble is the Republicans are now taking the path of least resistance and saying, hey, we might as well spend money too, just like Rob was saying before, because it's a way of buying off constituencies. It's a way of making sure that everybody's fat and happy. But it only works as long as people have faith in that money. And as soon as that faith is gone, you've got chaos.
Right. Germany in the 1930s.
That's right.
They were burning the currency to keep warm.
Yep.
But people don't know that because that's history.
Yeah.
All they know about is tonight's movie on Netflix.
Yeah, and that was a modern society and it in just a matter of months it completely fell apart. And we risk it again, and I think that's the number one disaster that haunts me more than the wars, more than the pandemics, more than anything else, is the idea that people could lose faith in our currency.
Yeah, well, you better buy gold on the dips.
Yeah.
I've been telling people for 25 years, and you better do it. Forget about these commercials. I don't make any money from those commercials. I don't even know these people. Just buy gold on the dips, and one day you'll say, thank God I listened to Frank from Woodbridge.
Frank from Woodbridge, we listen to you regularly. Thanks for calling in.
Take care.
We are Coming up to a break, we still got some people on hold who I would love to get to if you've got the patience to hang in there through the excellent news broadcast you're about to hear. This is Joe Markley. I'm here with my friend State Senator Rob Sampson, talking to you until 2 o'clock today on WTIC News Talk 1080. And this is Joe Markley here with you until 2 and here with you all this week, sitting in for Tom Shattuck and hoping I'm holding up the good standards of that show. With me in the studio is my good friend, State Senator Rob Sampson. We've talked a lot about energy costs. I want to get a little more philosophical here in this final hour, but first I want to give our patient callers a chance to tell us what's on their mind, and let's start with Keith in Mystic. How you doing, Keith?
Hi, thanks so much for taking my call. Appreciate it. Hey, I want to ask Senator Sampson, what are your thoughts? I saw an article the other day talking about U.S. Senator Chris Murphy wanting to get involved in housing legislation this upcoming session at the state capitol. Do you think there's a place for that? And then I know you do a great job as a ranking member on the housing committee. Where do you see that going? I know it's a hot topic. Any thoughts?
Yeah, Keith, I think Senator Murphy's got no business interfering with what happens at our state capitol. I mean, that would be my first reaction. I mean, he's a U.S. senator. If he wants to get involved in housing policy at a national level, more power to him. But, having people that are interfering in, the scope of government that they've not been elected to has never been something that I appreciate. I try and stay out of the business of my local town officials because I like them staying out of my business. And I feel the same way about Senator Murphy. Plus, anything that he might offer, obviously, is going to be something that I would probably not agree with. The big issue with housing in the state of Connecticut, affordable housing and so forth, is the one thing that seems to be missed by most people, and that is illegal immigration. It's people are talking about how we're 90,000 units short of housing and so forth in the state, and it's driving up prices and so forth. And all of that may be true, except that I think one thing that's exacerbating it is that we've got at least 80,000 undocumented illegal aliens in the state of Connecticut, and I get that number because I asked the Department of Motor Vehicles to provide for me the number of folks that are currently driving around with the undocumented driver's license. And that was the number that they gave me. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. And certainly there's a lot of issues to discuss when it comes to housing. But the focus on punishing landlords and property providers that the Democrats have been on is only making the problem worse. But I don't expect them to back away from it. I think I fully expect them to be back next year talking about rent caps and price fixing and interfering with local zoning. You name it. They're going to make more of a mess before we're in a position to fix it.
Thanks for the call, Keith. Let's check in with Matt in Bristol. What's on your mind, Matt?
Hi, Joe and Rob. How you doing?
Good. Great.
So I just had a quick question. With all these talks about energy, why did wind power get so popular? Whatever happened to hydro? I know you can't do it everywhere, but it seems a lot more reliable to me. But I don't know a lot about the subject, so I thought maybe you could answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I completely agree with you. It's something that we've been focused on in the legislature, in the minority party. Republicans have been advocating to get different types of renewable energy included as the type 1 renewable, or the kind that the Democrats legitimize, let's put it that way. But they've been closed-minded to the subject. They're focused on wind and solar. I don't know if that's because their connections in the world of green energy, as far as the industry goes, are in that position. But you're absolutely right. We need alternative forms of renewable energy that are actually cost effective, are reliable, produce energy in a constant form. Wind and solar. I mean, the knock on them is that you got a storage problem, and that's not going to change. The sun goes up and down, and weather and everything else, and the wind doesn't always blow. But when it comes to hydroelectric, it's a reliable form. You've got to find a location. But I think we've got a number of opportunities in the state of Connecticut that could be explored, and they've been reluctant to it. But that's another reason why I suggest that this is not just a every person problem. It is a Republican versus Democrat problem. It's one of these frustrations that it's very hard to serve in politics because people want to paint you as you're a partisan all the time. But these issues are partisan. Every Democrat is standing in the way of promoting better energy solutions, and every Republican is for it.
You end up being a partisan because you believe in something.
It seems to me like between hydro and nuclear, they could solve the problem, but they don't want to solve the problem. They want to run on the problem.
I think you have a profound insight there, and that's true of a lot of these problems that they've got to keep the ball in the air. Thanks for the call, Matt. It's funny that hydro, which is the oldest renewable energy, if we want to use that term, one that's been around since electricity was first generated, has been so lost in the mix. And there's so much capacity, there's so much potential for it in our part of the country. I was saying before that solar, to my mind, makes more sense if you're in the Southwest. Well, let the Southwest take advantage of their sun, and let us take advantage of our water and the nuclear element. That's the other key element. Let's take one more call from Star in Moodus. What's on your mind?
Hi. I had to take my dog out before, so I missed part of what you were talking about. I came in and I was hearing you talking about gas, and this is what's really been bothering me, because aren't Lamont and the Democrats against having more natural gas in the state?
Yes. They are against natural gas as a non-renewable source. Is that right, Rob?
Well, I mean, it depends on when you're talking about. Malloy, as I mentioned earlier in the program,
tried to expand
he got people off, oil, heat, and into natural gas. But you're right. They want to limit all fossil fuels. I don't know if it's a vendetta that the Democrat Party nationally has against the fossil fuel industry. Who knows what it is? But yeah.
Well, here's my question. Then why are they tearing up all the roads and putting in natural gas lines? I don't hear anybody talking about this.
Well, I know they were doing it years ago. There was a big push in Southington that there was an expansion of natural gas availability in some parts of town. I haven't seen that myself recently. I don't know if you have, Rob.
Oh, yeah. They've torn our whole road up from Colchester through Moodus, and it's called the Southeast Resiliency Project Phase 5. We got a letter from Eversource telling us that this is happening. We got this letter last April of 2023, and they're just now down past our house. Miles and miles of natural gas line.
I cannot answer that. I don't think Rob can off the top of his head either.
I don't know about that specific project. And again, you get mixed messages from the majority on which way they're going on all of these things. I mean, look, we've got to move ahead day to day. So you've got to have some functioning policy. And the only way to produce energy reliably in the state of Connecticut currently is with our one nuclear reactor and natural gas. Everything else is less reliable and less inclined to be a solution, at least as a majority portion of our electric grid. So obviously they're moving ahead with that. As far as local heating. I think natural gas is still the go-to answer for Connecticut, which is why you're seeing that. Whether they have a motivation to make some sort of change. I know that there's a big desire to push people towards electric heating of various types. And that's another part of that public benefits charge, which is the massive rebates that are being offered by the state of Connecticut for conversions to heat pumps and so forth.
Mm-hmm. I think of it as electric heat. Having had electric heat in the house many years ago, that was kind of a horror back in the day.
I still have electric heat in my house, Joe. Yeah, I've got the radiant panels, and I actually made the upgrade to heat pumps not too long ago as well. And it's far better.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, you're relying on an electric grid that is being producing energy largely by natural gas.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as the EV.
EVs, exactly.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. The Democrats are against fossil fuels, so they want electric vehicles, but are powered by natural gas.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that
makes sense out of it. I can't.
Makes so little sense. And that's one of the dangers of this whole situation. You mentioned before, kind of in passing, that wind and solar are the blessed energy sources. And why is that? And I think it's been pushed very effectively in that in the liberal media sphere. But there's no question, again, to talk about big powers, that there's money being made in it, and there's an incentive to push those kinds of things. I'll tell you, when I was in college, which is going back now a while, my liberal friend and I used to debate all kinds of things. And one of the things that was a hot issue back in those days was government subsidies for ethanol, to subsidize, to have farmers grow corn so it could be made into ethanol, so it could bolster the fuel supply. And that was in the days not so much when people were worried about fossil fuels as they were worried about having to get oil from overseas. So if we could be a little more energy independent. And I remember him saying, what's the downside? How could it be bad for government to do this? Well, if you want to know what the downside is, look now at the fact that basically the Iowa economy is based on this ethanol. And as a result of that, everyone who runs for president has to go to Iowa and say, we're going to maintain these subsidies forever, which otherwise we know don't make sense anymore. But it's become, you encourage something and then it takes root like a damn weed and you can't get it up afterwards. And it's hard to get the rest of the country sufficiently mad at the Iowa farmers for them to decide that this subsidy is a big mistake.
Yet another argument against big government being involved in everything.
In making decisions that the market ought to make. The market can't be influenced by lobbyists. The market can't be taken out to dinner or sent on a junket or the market is blind in that way, and that's what we need, not people making decisions. I've got to take one more because it's from Southington, and I can hardly say no. Bill from Southington, what's on your mind?
Hey, Joe, how are you?
Good.
I got a novice idea here. How about we pay back what they're looking for with the rainy day fund, and we give them 50 cents on the dollar and tell Eversource, guess what? You're not making big profits this quarter, or maybe even this year. It just seems like Eversource never loses. It's the one thing people can invest in. You're constantly going to be, getting your dividend. It's like, let them take the hit, lay off some execs.
Well,
it's just always, they just never lose.
I've always been suspicious of that too, because where's their incentive for efficiency and so forth when they're guaranteed a profit margin? What do you have to say about that? What do you say about that, Rob?
It's a very difficult question for me to answer because I never would have ventured down the road of having this method to produce our electricity or have it managed to begin with. Yeah, and I'm a capitalist, a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, but I don't equate a private company running a utility as a capitalist venture. They're protected by the government. They're bolstered by the government. I always, when people ask me, what's what, I always give them this answer, which is that I blame the majority party in the state 75% for our electric bill problems, and 25% I put on the backs of Eversource. I don't know if that's an accurate number, but that's my gut instinct. Generally speaking, the problems are largely because of policies made by the state, and Eversource is a reluctant participant. They have to go along, but you can be certain they're making out. And I think there's a symbiotic relationship between the majority party in this state and Eversource as well. And I'd like to get to the bottom of that as well.
Hey, if I wanted to talk a little more generally and maybe even a little philosophically about about political beliefs and political principles. And there's a lot of ways into that, but one was kind of suggested to me by one of the previous callers who called about housing policy. And what Chris Murphy wants Connecticut to do, which, again, I agree with you, is none of his business. His business is what I think you have your hands full trying to keep the United States on track without giving us proclamations from Washington, D.C. But to what extent? Well, let's talk first about zoning for a moment, because zoning strikes me as the kind of issue that conservatives can need to wrestle with to decide what they really believe in. I'm conflicted to some extent as a small government guy, because one side of me says government shouldn't be able to tell me what to do with my property. My father, who was a conservative of conservatives, and I think, Rob, you and he would have agreed almost on every single issue, but his attitude was, if you don't want them to put a drop forge next door to you, then you better buy that piece of property. But otherwise, if I own the property, I should be able to do what I want with it. People don't feel that way generally. And yet now we have this strange situation where, from the left, essentially, local zoning is being attacked, where they're saying, well, you're not permitting the construction of multifamily houses, apartments, whatever it is, low income rental, etc. And we want to strip out local zoning. I kind of come around to feeling like, I will say, let municipalities make whatever kinds of mistakes they want to. And if you don't like, if the zoning in Southington is driving you crazy, you can always move to Wolcott, maybe. But where do you come down on issues like that about how much power a municipality should have over us versus the federal government, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I'd say that all levels of government already have too much power over the citizens. But I say the first answer to the question is that you got to right size the solution. And certainly the state or federal government shouldn't be dictating what should be happening with some individual's property in whatever town, Connecticut. Now, the question between whether it's that homeowner's right to make that decision or the town's decision, I agree with you. It is a big struggle. As somebody who is a small government advocate, somebody who believes absolutely in individual liberty, to suggest that somehow the town should be dictating, what you can do on your own property is a difficult thing. But the way I wrestle with that, Joe, is the way I deal with a lot of things, which is, what are the other options? We've got 50 states, and we often make the argument for states' rights to say that, if you don't like the way the policies are in Connecticut, maybe you choose Florida or some other solution. And you've got that ability when it comes to municipalities and local control and the various zoning things that might apply. And look, there are places in Texas that got absolutely no local zoning whatsoever. You'll see a mansion next to a mobile home. For me, it's the ultimate deciding factor is when you bought your home, what were the rules at the time?
Yeah. And
for me, I think a lot of being a conservative means not changing the rules on people midstream. Don't go and tell someone, that if they own a certain business that now it's subject to new regulation. This is like Sunday sales for liquor stores, right, for example. That was one of the things that I thought of at the time. Some of these are hard decisions. I want to always err on the side of more individual liberty. But, when the government has already long established a set of rules, whether it be taxi cabs, you can come up with a bunch of things. Do you upend
car dealerships?
Yeah, car dealerships. Do you upend these things overnight just because you believe in more liberty? And that's the question. For me, I've always come up with the compromise that we should phase out the regulatory scheme where possible over time. That's what I generally believe on the subject of car dealers, for example.
To back away, I often think this should be another motto of mine. I wanted to get back in politics with my motto being, let's take a deep breath. Now I feel like it would be, let's just back away from what we're doing here. Hey, folks, we're going to take one more break here at the bottom of the hour. Enjoy the news. If you're on hold, please stay there, and we will try to get to you when we come back. This is Joe Markley with you on WTIC News Talk 1080. With me in the studio is State Senator Rob Sampson, and we've had great calls today. It's been a delight to do this show with a constant line of callers. In fact, the only problem with it is I always come in here thinking I really want a chance to talk to Rob about the deep stuff, but we get distracted by the by the good questions that people have for us. And let's see if we get a good one from Dave in Brantford. What's on your mind?
Two subjects, housing and energy. The housing, it strikes me that the local zoning regulations that Murphy's trying to invade federally are often portrayed as racist.
Yeah.
You know, the lot sizes. And that could drive up the cost. But the other thing is the codes that we are required to build by, housing codes, you know, that talk about efficiency standards and like wind resistance on your roof shingles, those greatly drive up the cost of building housing. And nobody ever talks about that the building regulations are racist, but they are when they double the cost of the housing.
Yeah, it's just as much so as the acre zoning or whatever else, because they have the same effect. You're right.
Absolutely. And some people would rather trade an extra $20 in heating bill for half the price of the upfront cost of buying the house.
Right.
I know I would, you know, when so many young people, they can't get past that initial cost. And on the energy thing, I know Timmy brought up a question of where would we put a new nuclear plant? Well, I think Mr. Sampson got something slightly wrong. There are actually two nuclear plants at the Millstone site, Unit 2 and Unit 3. Unit 1 was decommissioned, and we tore it down, and there's definitely room to build a great big new nuclear plant where the Millstone 1 used to be.
Yes.
And that would be an ideal location to put another one. And my suggestion, because I come from the all of the above energy solution, there's not one great new idea, is that all the bio waste that we have from chipping trees, every time we get a tornado or a hurricane or an ice storm, there's just an unbelievable amount of cellulose from chipping the trees. And there is no central plant that we're able to burn that and turn it into electricity. And the eco warriors, they're against combustion of every kind. But the thing is, the carbon that's in that wood, that would be fast returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide when the trees just sit on the ground and rot. Yeah. And so we're generating CO2 uselessly when we should have trucks take it to a plant and incinerate it, much like we did at the old trash plants, which one by one, again, the eco warriors are against burning trash, which is another source of, in terms of all of the above, that we've just let die.
Excellent point. That carbon is coming out one way or another. Whether it comes out fast or comes out slow is not really the issue, except that we can actually make something of it if we took advantage of it.
Excellent work by you guys. All you did is push ideas. I didn't hear you knock by name any Democrats.
Well, thank you. I will try to resist. Now that you've said it, I'll try to resist it for another 18 minutes. Thanks very much for the call, Dave. Well, we're doing well with these folks. Let's try Adam in East Hartford and see what's on his mind today. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back. This is Joe Markley sitting in for Tom Shattuck on News Talk 1080 WTIC. Markley sitting in for Tom Shattuck. I'll be back tomorrow and throughout the week. My guest in the studio tomorrow, and we'll be taking your calls throughout the show as we did today, will be Red Janke, who's a real expert on the fiscal issues, something that I think we need to talk about more than we do. But I want to give Rob Sampson a chance to wrap up and maybe give us a little glimpse of what he sees in the future, and if there's some hope there, whether it's this fall or further down the road for common sense conservatism in Connecticut.
What a setup. Thanks a lot, Joe. Yeah, no, as I alluded to, I mean, I've never felt better about the prospects of the Connecticut Republican Party. I've never felt better. 14 sessions I've served in the legislature, 4 terms in the House, just finished my 3rd term in the Senate. I usually walk out of the Capitol building on the final night, sine die, they call it. Usually I'm pretty down, defeated, demoralized, because I put a lot of effort in. Anybody who follows me knows I put a lot of effort into every session. I probably do more talking on the floor and in committee than just about anybody else in the building. And when you put that much on the line and you end up losing, I tell people all the time, we win every argument and lose nearly every vote. Yeah, exactly. It can wear you out, and it can make you question whether you want to go back there and fight that battle again. But this particular session, this most recent session, we have a new leader, Steve Harding, guy served with in the House. I don't know that there were high expectations for Steve. But
I had hopes, but not expectations.
Exactly. I put it in the same terms. But he has exceeded every expectation, and I couldn't be more happy to have him as our leader of Senate Republicans. He took the time to listen to me. He took the time to actually take the chance to do some of the things that I've been after my leaders in both chambers to do for a long time. And as a result, we did very well. We prevented the lion's share of negative policy from being implemented and passed in the state. We had no gun control to speak of, no big green energy bill. You know, the House and Senate Democrats have this green monster bill, which is kind of equivalent to the AOC Green New Deal. But on the state level, we blocked that from happening. You could write a pretty long list of negative policies that the Democrats were counting on passing. And we just wore them out. We went in with a mission to win every day. That was our mission. And we did that. And ultimately, at the end of the session, they were scratching their heads at what got away from them. Of course, the Democrats did bring us in for a special session, which is their safety valve, I guess,
Exactly.
that they use and exploit. But we forced them into that position, and they certainly still walked away with far less than they might have gotten in a different situation. So I'm hopeful that we're going to go back next year on the same tone.
Do you see how are you feeling about November from the point of